Our next speaker is Dr Vannessa Hearman. We're welcoming Vannessa back to Melbourne. She's a lecturer in Indonesian Studies at the University of Sydney, but has also lectured and tutored in Asian history here at this university and at the Australian Catholic University. Her work has been in the area of politics of memory in Indonesia, on the Cold War and Indonesia in particular. Her work deals with activism, social movements and the Indonesian left. Her doctoral thesis was on the 1965 to 1968 anti-communist killings in East Java in Indonesia. She completed that here at this university, where she was awarded the University of Melbourne Human Rights Scholarship. And so it's entirely appropriate that she speaks on human rights and the Indonesian elections.
My topic is to look at the question of human rights during the Indonesian elections, and part of that is spurred on by the fact that parties such as Golkar, as Dirk has already mentioned, and Gerindra did so well in the 2014 elections. And what does it tell us about the state of Indonesia's transition and accountability for past human rights abuses, when in many ways it looks like we're returning to some of the same powers that were in control in Indonesia during the Suharto regime that have not had any form of accountability enforced against them during that period of transition from 1998 until now. And when we look at at where we're at with enforcing human rights accountability, which is why I titled this slide Taking Stock, where are we in terms of human rights accountability? In 2012, as President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono promised that he would deliver an apology for past human rights abuses that took place under the new order as part of his legacy to come to terms with the past, to put the past to rest. And yet that apology was never delivered, and there was plenty of pressure against SBY and his advisor, Albert Hasibuan, not to draft and not to issue that apology. And in 2012 also, the National Human Rights Commission, Komnas HAM, issued a report into the 1965-66 killings, which put the blame squarely at the hands of the military and in particular its territorial structures for being unable to prevent the killings, and in many instances encourage the commission of violence against members and sympathisers of the Indonesian Communist Party at the time. And that report has since been shelved with the Attorney General's Office for further action, which it doesn't look to be forthcoming. The release of the film, the documentary, The Act of Killing, created some ripples, certainly internationally, and a little bit in Indonesia, but not as much as what you would have thought, given the controversial nature of the film itself. So even The Act of Killing was unable to shift a lot of the issues to do with human rights in Indonesia, of making things happen on that front. And the issue of the increasing rate of electoral boycott, Dirk mentioned that the PDIP was the winner of these elections. Some of the commentaries I've read have asked the question, was Golput the real winner? Was the electoral boycott the real winner when we see the high rates of electoral boycott in these elections? Does this, to me, this points to an issue of increasing disenchantment with the government and its inability to meet many of the basic needs and expectations of Indonesians today. There are also fewer parties that are competing and fewer centres of power. So from 48 parties in 1999, we're now down to 12 parties, 2 of which almost didn't make the verification process. So it is becoming more onerous to contest elections in Indonesia today. The popularity of both Golkar and Gerindra, I think 2 things I'll talk about. The question that arises is, have human rights become less important in these elections? In particular, given the orientation of some former activists who, in particular those who were kidnapped by the special forces that were associated with Prabowo Subianto in 97-98, their orientation towards Gerindra, of joining Gerindra, of becoming legislative candidates for Gerindra, this decision by a lot of these activists to do that have given rise to debate within the human rights activist community about what is happening to human rights in Indonesia when activists are defecting to the Gerindra cause. So I want to have a look a little bit at, this is an image of Kamisan, which is a rally that takes place every Thursday, hence the name Kamisan, outside the presidential palace in Jakarta every Thursday between 4 and 6 p.m. And what people are trying to draw attention to, there are some common cases that continue to be focused upon by the human rights community, including they're largely Suharto regime cases. So the Trisakti shootings of 1998, the disappearances of political activists, the 1965-66 killings, the 1984 Tanjung Priok shootings, and so on. So the Kamisan event is, I would say, a symbol for the campaign to enforce human rights accountability in Indonesia. And people have been standing there since 2007 until now. And certainly when the apology was on the cards, there was some optimism which perked up among the Kamisan protesters. In 2012, the Truth and Justice Coalition, the KKPK, declared it the Year of Truth-Telling. And KKPK is a coalition that unites different human rights NGOs and campaign groups. And part of the reason why they declared the Year of Truth-Telling was to support SBY's proposed apology, to ensure that, as well as the pressure that's coming from some military officers not to put forward the apology, that there was a corresponding pressure from human rights NGOs on this topic. They held some truth hearings involving victims and some perpetrators and community leaders in Jakarta, in Palu and in Solo in 2012 to 2013. And some of the results out of these hearings were very good. For example, in Palu in Central Sulawesi, there was an apology which was given by the mayor of Palu for what had happened and his own role in Palu with regards to the 1965-66 violence. And there were some very solid promises that there are some promises that the mayor made about giving scholarships and health assistance to those families who were affected in Palu as a result of the 1965-66 violence. So this points, I think, to some interesting local level campaigning that is going on, and some of the points that Dirk made previously about the local level I think is very important, and I think we're seeing some of this in human rights activism as well. I mentioned before, was Golput the real winner? And I guess I'm being a bit flippant when I say that, because I think that we can't say that because we have to compare apples with apples. And I think that what the rise of the Golput tells you, though, is that many voters don't see the election as a vehicle for positive change. They're questioning the reason for being involved in the elections. And these are some of the rates over the past years in each of the elections. So it's fair to say that, as what I earlier discussed, enforcing human rights accountability has lost a great deal of momentum, and at the same time there is an indicator here of voter disengagement with the high rate of Golput in these elections. I mentioned before the decline of the political parties from 48 to 12 in spite of the 2 new political parties contesting this year, and I think that it points to a centralisation of power and the return of some of the same political forces, albeit in different guises. I want to look now at a case study of a meeting that was held by Komnas HAM on the 3rd of April this year, just before the elections. And the meeting was to highlight, was a discussion about how parties viewed the role of human rights in the elections. So only 3 parties attended that meeting, and 2 of which were the newest parties, which was the PKPI, the Nasdem and Golkar. And Golkar made the claim at that meeting that the New Order Golkar and the Golkar now are 2 very different creatures. And the spokesperson for Golkar said, nowadays we are making human rights as the basic platform of Golkar's politics. Golkar will continue to voice very loudly issues related to human rights, and indeed this is what we will be doing, and this is the way it should be. And yet, the concerns about Golkar, aside from their association with the former New Order regime, is the ongoing concerns about, for example, the issue of the Lapindo Mud flow in East Java, and to what extent have the victims been compensated, and the involvement of the Bakri company in that Lapindo mud flow case. And that's very much been a thorn in the side in terms of Bakri's own record and his popularity in this, I think, in these elections. The issue of the involvement of Nasdem. So the representative of Nasdem, Taufik Basari, he said that our party's commitment to human rights is a basic foundation for our party, and we are more trusted by the people than other parties. I'm just translating this direct from the Indonesian quotes. So if Nasdem was to be given the trust to go to Parliament, our main principle is to push forward so that the state policy can resolve many cases of human rights abuses, he said. So again, a promise to deal with the past. However, there was an incident where Nasdem thugs attacked journalists who were protesting outside Metro TV against Surya Paloh, who's the chairman of Nasdem, outside their office last year in January 2013. So a lot of these parties are making the same statements. However, a lot of the evidence on the ground is certainly quite different. And PKPI said that the issue of human rights in Indonesia needs full social control from society itself to deal with this past. At the moment, he says, Budi Samudjo says, at the moment we are experiencing a multidimensional crisis. People are being made to forget about human rights abuses that occurred in the past. I would like the people to be able to think critically. So choose a candidate who can channel your aspirations, the aspirations of the people, he said. However, the fact that PKPI is headed by Sutioso, who was the former commander of the Jakarta area in 1996, points to the fact, raises the question that there are still unresolved issues from the attack on the PDI headquarters in Jakarta in July 1996, in which he was implicated. So when I talk about some of the similar, the rise of the rejuvenation of the similar forces that were in power during the Suharto's New Order regime, these are some of the issues behind the parties that we see now contesting. So Golkar and Gerindra are occupying numbers 2 and 3, respectively, in the quick count. What are the problems with Gerindra? The most obvious problem is Prabowo's association with past human rights abuses, the kidnapping of activists in 1997 and 1998. And journalists are instructed not to ask about these issues specifically on a list of 3 things that journalists are not allowed to ask Prabowo. And so, and what is the appeal of Gerindra, therefore? This is the question. Some activists have argued that Gerindra represents a break with old-style politics, in particular their rejection of wholesale liberalisation on the issues of foreign investment and natural resources. And this is a big issue in Indonesia, as we've seen with the implementation of the mineral resources and coal export prohibitions recently in the Undang-Undang Minerba. So the decision by some activists to support Gerindra has divided the activist community. It's not been convincingly argued, for example, by the former activists in the People's Democratic Party, the PRD, that Gerindra represents something other than something different to just another vehicle for the old interests. One of his kidnapped victims, one of the people who were kidnapped in 1997-98, Aan Rusdianto, who was a member of the PRD, he says, I must come to peace with my past. And for him, that means to run in the elections as a candidate for Gerindra. Gerindra's action program on ekonomi kerakyatan, a popular form of economics, is particularly something that activists have pointed to and said this is something progressive that has to be supported. So these are some of the reasons why activists are supporting Gerindra. Some activists are supporting Gerindra. Other activists who were prominent in the past have gone to the PDIP, for example, Budiman Sujatmiko, and the PKB, and here is the campaign material for Dita Sari, who ran, former trade union activist, who ran in East Java under the umbrella of the PKB. But what I want to look at here is the support for a new candidate, Jokowi, I think points to some of the same concerns that are motivating voters that were related to those that unseated Suharto in 1998. So in this way, I want to have a look at, is there a reprioritisation or a redefinition of what constitutes human rights in this. What does it mean? And I think it's about a new type of politics, of adequate basic services and clean government. And these are the things that voters rated Democrat highly in the 2009 elections. So what is the excitement around Jokowi focused on? Promises of free healthcare, education, mass transit capture people's imagination of what Indonesian cities could look like and what their lives could look like. They're holding out for improvements to quality of life, the right to a livable city, to clean politicians, to health and education. But is he just a large city middle class phenomenon? And this is certainly something that people have raised in some of the comment pieces. Ian Wilson, for example, looked at this in the Jakarta Post, that the promises that there shall be no evictions of the poor in North Jakarta, this certainly hasn't come about, that people have been evicted in large numbers under the Jokowi Ahok administration. And Ahok has talked about human rights as just hamburgers, and that the people who protested about the evictions, that these were just new style communists. So is there a shift away from the previous crimes of the New Order towards a new form of human rights as it is conceptualised? And I want to go back to this issue about the local initiatives in human rights. I mentioned the apology, but there are also local initiatives such as the opening of the Munir Museum in East Java. And I think this points to a certain giving up, a resignation of the fact that the central government could actually meet the demands of victims of human rights abuses when it comes to some of these cases. Because the Munir Museum is definitely a shift away from looking at human rights as something that you demand from your government, but something that you can try and initiate yourself and try and discuss. So, and the families of Munir and Wijitukul have very much continued a lot of this activism, but on a very local level to the extent that they can, with participation in concerts and songs and writing about their experiences in a different way to just expecting things from the government. So, has there been a redefinition, reprioritisation of rights? That's the question I want to ask. And is that to do with because the process has stalled and people have given up? So have ideas about human rights shifted towards other issues? But does that shift come at the expense of specific human rights abuse cases and advocacy on those cases? And I think that that's very convenient for those with dark past to say, let's not talk about these old cases anymore. Let's talk about basic rights such as free education and free healthcare, and not think about what happened under the New Order regime. And so these local initiatives, I think, continue to press for different forms of accountability, and yet people still face great battles in trying to deal with this past. Thank you.